The problem is you do see a lot of antisocial people succeed. Loneliness is as big a risk factor for ill health and death.
We live inside our heads.
You go cold turkey, you go into withdrawal.
There is a lot of value in the stuff that we struggle with.
Better Thinking. Conversations with experts exploring all things psychology. Welcome back to Better Thinking. My name's Nesh Nikolic, and today I have the privilege of speaking with Tom Ware, whose almost 90 years of life experience offer incredible insights into what it means to live with purpose, curiosity, and self-awareness. Tom came to Australia from the United Kingdom in 1951 and has since lived a remarkably diverse life. Over the years, he's worked in fields ranging from aviation and electrical power to law enforcement, and even spent a year as an Antarctic Expeditioner. After 44 years in the workforce, Tom took a voluntary redundancy in 1995 and began what has become the most meaningful chapters of his life, retirement. For the past 3 decades, he's dedicated himself to volunteer work, creative writing, public speaking, and perhaps most importantly, helping others discover their own why. His mission is simple yet profound: to enable people to come to greater self-understanding and to realize their true potential, especially as they transition into later life. In this conversation, we explore what makes for a long, happy, and purposeful retirement, from cultivating curiosity and creativity to embracing change and finding meaning beyond work. It's an inspiring discussion about aging well, personal growth, and a lifelong journey of self-discovery. I really enjoyed speaking with Tom, and I'm excited to share this conversation with you. So let's jump right in. Tom, a big thank you for coming onto the show today. I've been looking forward to our conversation, particularly to have an opportunity to talk about retirement. It's not a topic that is often spoke about, sadly. At the same time, I think it poses questions about why is retirement living different to, employment living, if I can call it that, or paid employment living. And I know that you have a really nice take on, how to be purposeful and how to be how to enjoy these particular years. So, thank you for coming on, and looking forward to throwing some questions at you.
I'm looking forward to answering them, Nesh.
Let me start. I often start with, how did you get into, this being an interest for you? Did this come about prior to going into retirement yourself? Is it something that started to tap you on the shoulder in some of those years leading toward retirement? How did this come about?
Well, I spent most of my life, I guess, looking for the ideal job. And up until 40 years of age, I had a really exciting life and did many, many things. I was in the Navy, I was in civil aviation, I even did a year as an Antarctic Expeditioner. And then at 40, I thought, well, I better settle down and look for something meaningful. And I just couldn't find it. And I ended up working for 17 years, my final 17 years, working for the Australian government in the Australian Taxation Office. But the last 5 years of those in what they called the Child Support Agency, which was all high pressure stuff. You could never please anyone. And I always kept searching for, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? When am I going to find this ideal job? And I did numerous interviews, but I couldn't just get out of that 9-to-5 environment, working in front of a computer, desk, a person in a computer. And then what happened is I got the opportunity, because the ATO, the Australian Tax Office, was downsizing, to take voluntary retirement and get paid out. And I was 59, and I put in for it. And apparently there was about 1,600 jobs to go Australia-wide, but it worked out where in my office, there were only about a dozen or so, and there were only 3 men on the books. And I didn't know, and I was keeping my fingers crossed I was one of those, and I was. So at 59, I got out. And I had no idea, no intention of being retired. I thought, well, I'm very employable, so I'll apply for jobs. And I did that, and I applied and I applied, and I think I applied for about 150 different jobs. I think I made the interview 5 times, the shortlist twice, and got knocked out, second choice. And suddenly I found I was out of work. So what am I going to do? I'm a young man, so seemingly so, under 60, full of energy and so forth. And then it dawned on me, all of my hobbies, which I had since I was in my mid-30s, which were public speaking, speaking to audiences, creative writing, and most important, I've always been into self-knowledge and self-understanding, and even a bit of this, what they call woo-woo stuff today. So I had no trouble at all in getting plenty of speaking engagements, all on what they call the freebie circuit. And also sitting down and writing books. So since I've been retired, I've probably written a dozen books. I've spoken to probably well over 1,000 audiences. I've given workshops on storytelling, public speaking in South Australia, Queensland, New South Wales, Auckland, New Zealand, and even up in Hong Kong. So I've really been very, very busy and thoroughly enjoying it. And I think these have been in many ways, the most productive and useful years of my life as a retiree. That's about it.
Is that because you feel that you leaned into those passions of yours, your hobbies, so to speak, through necessity? You found yourself that you'd, I suppose, exhausted the traditional sense of I'm going to apply and I'm being knocked back, and obviously the conditions must have been quite difficult at that time because you're not walking in with no experience. At 59, you've got a wealth of experience and still a lot of work to provide, but the conditions must have been such that it just wasn't much. The employment rate must have been a hard one.
It was that, I think. The other thing is, it's surprising. Well, it's not surprising. Everybody seems to think that nowadays that once you get over about 40, you're over the hill. You've lost your creativity and you've got no zest in you anymore. How wrong they are. But I mean, that's the way the other thing is, when I was applying for jobs, you walk into a place and there's a little bevy of, say, 3 people sitting across the desk from you, asking you questions, and you realize they're young enough to be your children. And let's face it, nobody wants to promote someone into a job, who's young enough, who's old enough to be their dad. And that's the way it is. It's very hard to if you go into an interview and you're 10 years younger than the interviewees, you've got a good chance. But if you're older, not much chance. That's the way I see it.
Any thoughts as to why? Is it an intimidation type of scenario? What do you think are the barriers there?
I think there is some level of intimidation, and the intimidation comes from the person who's being interviewed. If, like myself, you're very self-assured, you've had a lot of experience, and they're interviewing you. I'll give you an example of something that happened to me once. I was in the tax office and they were interviewing me for a higher position. And they said, "Have you ever had any real responsibility, Tom?" And I said, "Yes." I said, I was the watch supervisor at Port Moresby Airport back in 1965 with the authority to close the airport if the conditions were such. Well, that rattled them. They couldn't conceive of anything like that. They were talking about little office works and decisions in the office. Yeah. And here was I mean, I did 11 years with civil aviation, much like air traffic control, that type of work. Very responsible work. And they just couldn't conceive it.
Yeah. There is this strange concept, and I haven't actually spent much time thinking about it, nor trying to really unpack it, but there is this kind of concept of someone being overqualified. I'm not quite sure what that what that means? Is there a fear that the person will be bored and they'll therefore, retention will go down because the person will say after 6 months, no, this isn't for me? Is it, the dynamic within a working environment where someone's just, so senior that the intimidation is there or so? I'm not sure what this concept of overqualified means.
Well, I think overqualified means exactly what you said, that they expect that you'll find the job boring and will leave. I had a number of, when I came back from the Antarctic, no, it was before I went. I came back from New Zealand when Gough Whitlam was still in power. That's how long ago it was. And I had a number of jobs, all short term. I worked in the foundry for about 2 or 3 weeks. I drove a truck for 6 months. And when I applied for various jobs, because I think I'd already had over 20 years in telecommunications, people would say, "Oh, you'd be bored with this job." And frankly, I was just after temporary work, just trying to get some money rolling in before I could find the ideal job, which I never found.
Sure. How about leaning into the focus of retirement, fostering that longer term, purposeful, meaning driven years, whether it's retirement and maybe there's more flexibility in that space. I don't know, I'm not there yet. Or maybe for people like myself who, retirement is a little way away, and I'm not quite sure what retirement even means, because I have this kind of yearning to work what feels like forever, in some form, a real strong engagement in something all the time. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I think looking at your situation, I would say that you're probably in a job that you really enjoy already. It's a sort of a vocation, and you won't retire. You'll just keep going. I mean, you might change the background. It might step down a little bit. You might find yourself going out on the speaker's circuit, so to speak, if that's more effective and you like it. My idea, I much prefer speaking to live audiences than I do doing Zoom conversations. I think most people do, because I'm going to have a sip of coffee too. I think once you're in the room with people, not necessarily a great big audience. I mean, I've done big audiences, but for example, at the moment, I'm working on presenting a workshop called Creating Your Creativity, which I'm going to run with another person on the 29th of next month. So we hope to get about 20 people along, and it'll be about a 5-hour workshop with you taking 50-50 each. And I'm looking forward to that. I love learning and teaching.
Mm-hmm. So for you, some of what gives you purpose and meaning, the drive is around learning, teaching, sharing with others, and being able to do that. I'm assuming with more flexibility now in retirement than you were able to potentially engage in those sort of paid employment years.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
most certainly. I found that when I was working, I had some very humdrum jobs in the tax office, very terrible, boring sort of stuff. And I was always trying to get into training. Every now and again, they'd whip me into training, and I could do that. And so long as I knew the subject, I could make it interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoyed it thoroughly. But there was always constrictions. Once you got out, I think my main part of speaking outside of Toastmasters has been as an entertaining speaker, telling stories, real life stories out of history and that sort of thing, dramatizing them. And I love that. And I probably have about 35 stories I mean, I can remember, for example, telling the story of the Titanic. Now, I told the story of the Titanic many times, but I've heard people come up to me and say, God, Tom, that was better than the movie. And on the 100th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic, I did a big presentation at Blacktown Workers Club here in New South Wales. There was 168 people came to the dinner. We had a dinner and we set it up really well. We had the old-fashioned tables, the old-fashioned menu, everything was done. And I did this presentation on the Titanic, which went for 36 minutes after dinner. And they loved it, and it's recorded. I mean, I can send you a video of it if you're interested.
Absolutely.
So that's the sort of thing that I've been doing in retirement. Some of the things
we can definitely link that to our show notes, so anyone listening can go to the website and click on that and find that presentation as well. So it seems like. And I don't know if I'm catching the vibe here or not, but there's something about community here as well. When you spoke about, the Titanic, presentation, it's 160 people, all gathering for the same, reasons.
Yeah.
There's some sort of collection of like-minded, people. There's an interest that's in common. There's something there, and then bonding through, whether it's storytelling or some reflections on that story. Am I on the right track? Is there something about community that is connected with this purposeful and joyful, meaningful retirement for you?
Yes, I think the main. I mean, I'm in two Toastmasters clubs. Have you heard of Toastmasters?
Yes.
And I've been a Toastmaster for 53 years. I joined in New Zealand at the age of 36, and then came back to Australia because I was only over there for 2.5 years. Came back to Australia and joined a Toastmaster club here in Parramatta, and then I've worked my way up. I'm what they call a distinguished Toastmaster now. There are many of them, of course. And so that gives me a background where I've been able to speak regularly all of the time. And then in Toastmasters in the old days, to get ahead, they've changed the rules, but in the old days, you had to go outside and give presentations, so many, and prove that you'd done it. So I went out and did my mandatory 5 presentations outside to people like Rotary and so forth. I think my second meeting was an all-women's business club called Zonta. Can you imagine me? I'm a 36-year-old at the time, and there's these 50-year-old women high up in business, and I'm just telling them a story. But they loved it. So I liked it so much that I started to go outside, and I ended up doing, before I retired, I did about 60 or 70 speeches outside of Toastmasters. And then when I retired, I continued on. So now I've done, I think, guest speaker appearances. I think it's about 947 of those. So I'm an experienced speaker. Let's put it this way, Nesh. Probably done a couple of thousand presentations. And also I'm on YouTube. You probably know that.
Yes.
I'm on YouTube, and I've done, I think, about 2,200 videos. So I'm very productive.
And what is it about speaking that gives you so much satisfaction? I can see in the conversation, obviously, in the enormous body of work that you've developed, 53 years in Toastmaster. This is a big key element of joy and satisfaction for you. What is it about speaking that does that for you?
It's hard to say, really. It's how could I put it? When you're speaking to a live audience, there is an atmosphere, and people think it's just the words and the body language, but it's more than that. I'll tell you another thing I have been into, Nesh. I'm into a thing called Vipassana meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard of that?
I most
Well,
certainly have.
and I've been into Vipassana meditation since I was 50. And I'm coming up to 90 next year. So that'll give you an idea of how long I've been in that. Okay. Now, up in the Blue Mountains behind Sydney, there's a retreat called Dharma Bhumi, and it's a Buddhist type retreat. I've been up there 14 times and done 14 10-day retreats. Now, when you do a 10-day retreat, it's the hardest thing you'll ever do. You've got to say that you'll abide by the rules, which means getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning. You've got to maintain noble silence, not even allowed to make eye contact with anyone else. You have 2 vegetarian meals a day, and you meditate for 11 hours every day. So you can imagine what that does to you. So first 3.5 days, you bring your mind under the control of your will. It stops chattering. And then you're introduced to Vipassana meditation proper, which is no imagination, no mantras, nothing like that, just staying with the real experience. And what they do is they get you to focus on any natural sensation on the body: sweat, trembling, heat, cold, so forth. And you do that and you become highly focused because of your mind. You get to the stage where you start to be able to feel sensations over your body, all down. The instructor tells you what to do, but the magic part starts when you start going inside your body, because then you realize that with your concentration, there is no body. You go right through. And eventually your body dissolves and all you can feel is like effervescent bubbles coming out of nowhere and going into nowhere. This is us. The only thing that remains is consciousness. I am, if I might put it that way. And the rest is just temporary. So when you've done that, you get a different perspective on life, Nesh. That's what it is. So I try to bring people to the realization that the important thing is, or the only thing that never changes, if I might put it into words, would be I am. I am. In other words, I am conscious and I have a will. And everything else behind that, we add to it. We add to it. We build our character, we build our personality and so forth. So the truth of what we are is this I am. Deep stuff.
Is there a sense of liberation that practice?
There is apparently, but it hasn't happened to me yet. What happens with me when I do meditation, I've reached the stage now where I'm so sensitive that I can feel my default, if I stop talking to you and stop thinking, I can feel my aura. You know, you've heard of the human aura. It's like, it feels almost like a gelatinous mass that moves through you like that and around you. And it's dependent upon your thinking and your emotions at the time. And there are people, I can't do it, but there are people who can see the aura. They can see the colors around you and the changing. In fact, I've got a book here by a woman called Barbara Ann Brennan. Ever heard of her?
No.
Make the note. This is very important. Barbara Ann Brennan. Now, I think she died fairly recently, but she was a scientist, also a seer, and she worked for NASA for a while. And I've got this huge book called, not Hands of Light, Light Emerging, it's called. And it's a big, thick book. It's far bigger than A4 size. Cost me $50, and I got it about 19 years ago. So it's got all sorts of illustrations and how the aura changes around when people are talking, how it gets angry, when you get angry, different colors and so forth. So it's I guess my main fascination now, and has been really all my life, is what are we? You know that question, what am I?
Mhm.
Not who am I, what am I? So that's the thing that I've been working on really for many, many years.
Mm.
And the other thing is just done for fun, the storytelling and all that.
So some of the purpose is in actual fact asking a much more deep and meaningful philosophical question, if you will, around you know, who we are, whether we use the terminology of there's a spirituality, exploration of spirituality, or connectedness, or being grounded yourself. There's something that you're contemplating, grappling with around what is this thing that we are living. And consciousness is one word, that there's a place from which we can observe or witness. These are all just language sounds that we make to try and describe different relations or positioning or perspectives. But there's a lot of engagement, intrigue that you have now in your, I suppose, later life that you are, spending time thinking about.
Yeah, I think really, if you want to be satisfied with your life, you have to develop a philosophy which appeals not only to your mental side, your physical side, but your spiritual side. Bring them all into alignment. If any of those are a bit out of place, then you've got to try to bring them together, and that's the thing. I mean, your physical body is really your earthly instrument. It's like owning a car. You got to look after it, and you can enjoy it. You have a coffee and a bit of cake and a couple of beers and all that sort of stuff. That's enjoyment, but it certainly can't be a life purpose. I mean, people you've probably heard yourself. They think, oh, I'm going to be happy once I'm rich, when I've got all that, and then they get it. They're not happy. There's always the seeking, because we're pushed from within. I think we're pushed by our own higher self. I call it our higher self. I'll give you an example. When I was in Department of Civil Aviation, this was going to be my career. I'd worked my way up. I'd become being groomed for stardom and all that sort of stuff. And I came back from New Guinea in 1965, and I found myself getting more and more disillusioned with the work. But I had everything going for me. I had the respect of my peers. I was working my way up to seniority. I'd passed all the examinations. I was happily married with 3 small children, paying off a mortgage. In theory, I had everything. And yet something inside of me was absolutely screaming out. I was miserable. And then something happened. I was standing in front of the mirror, having a shave, getting ready to go on afternoon shift at Sydney Airport. And this absolute rage came up inside of me. And I remember shaking my fist at my own reflection in the mirror and saying, like, if there's any purpose to my meaning, God, for God's sake, show me what it is. And I had an epiphany. You hear that word epiphany, it's bandied around a lot. But a real epiphany is something like this. Suddenly, I was outside of my body. I was standing outside. My presence was outside of my body, looking at myself, looking at my reflection in the mirror. Okay? At the same time, whatever it was, the real I, which was outside of my body, was absolute love, absolute unconditional love, absolute joy, absolute compassion, and infinite understanding, as it felt sorry for this little guy who was suffering. And I thought, and it only lasted about 10 seconds. That moment stayed with me as the high point of my life, because from that point, I realized that we're all that. We are that. The rest of it we make up. So to use a biblical expression, we are gods. All of us are really gods at this highest level, experiencing ourselves at lower and lower levels. And when we decide, wherever we decide to manifest as human beings, we cut off that memory of what we really are. If we didn't cut it off, there'd be no experience. We have to be in a world of opposites to experience anything. A great book to read on this is, I don't know if you've ever read any of his books, is Neil Donald Walsh. Have you heard of him?
I have Conversations with God. It was
Conversation with God, book 1. Just the first 2 chapters tells you so much. That without cold you can't experience hot. Without big you can't experience small. In other words, there has to be relativity. We now, as human beings, we live in a dimension of relativity. Otherwise, we couldn't experience it all. In other words, in the absence of that which we are not, we are not. You like that? It's not my phrase.
What do you think were the conditions that gave birth, so to speak, to this epiphany? This moment of clarity for you, unconditional love, connection. A sense of being, a sense of.
I think because we're all urged inside at our highest level to find something, to work towards the highest level. And if we work, look, you can have all the material things that your mind wants, but your heart doesn't want it. Your heart wants something else. Your heart knows what you really want. And you could say your heart is intuition, the intuition. Have you ever heard of, what's his name? Dr. Roberto Assagioli?
No.
Well, Dr. Roberto Assagioli was a contemporary of Freud and Adler and Jung, and he came up with a thing called psychosynthesis. And he was saying that we have conscious mind, unconscious mind, subconscious mind, etc. And then he has what he called the elements of the mind: thought, feeling, sensation, and all of these things. They are elements of the mind. And then the top element of the mind is intuition, and that intuition comes directly from your higher self. So always go with your intuition. If there's a decision to be made of real importance, your intuition knows the right one, not your mind. Your mind will start rationalizing, why you can't do it and all that. But your intuition is the pipeline to your higher self. And I believe that.
Cool.
Are you flabbergasted yet?
It's so interesting. I continually grapple with language, and I grapple with it because the meaning of these sounds that we make is so important. Whether it's in my clinical work, whether it's listening to someone speak like yourself, trying to understand what these words mean, because the meaning for you, I'm trying to understand. So when there's a word, for example, my higher self, or unconditional love, or feeling a sense of strong connection. What are those things? For me, so when I'm listening, even the word intuition, I've always struggled with the word intuition. Is intuition a feeling? Is it a word that we give to a feeling that we are willing to go with? Because I often experience that a lot of people go with their feelings in the conversations I have in my therapy room. And some of those things are very often can be avoidance, for example, which becomes a problem in how people live. But we're not talking about a feeling of avoidance. It's kind of like a feeling of trying to be guided to, the right, so to speak.
Yeah.
And sometimes the feeling of guided by the right has a rationality attached to it, or we're tapping it in. It's a bit elusive. It's a hard language. It's a hard word to talk about for me to understand what is intuition, and no different to, how do I understand it for the application process? And maybe I might just get too heady. I might be too caught up in the mind and not kind of looking inwards enough, or trying to tap into feelings. But I do struggle with it. Maybe I've got a bit of an analytical mind. So the word intuition is a hard one for me.
Yeah, I can understand that. The thing is, you probably heard the difference between reaction and response. Often, I mean, some reactions are good, like putting your foot on the brake. If the car brakes in front of you, that's a reaction. But then flying off the handle because somebody gave you the finger out the window of their car, that's not a good. That's a reaction, not a response. A response would be when you think, you just pause for a moment and think, well, who knows what's going through that poor fella's mind, So a response is probably closer to intuition. It gives you that ability to pause before you do something, and then the response, that's closer to coming from your intuition than coming from your ego. As you probably know, ego is virtually nothing but conditioned mind, and it's like, well, let's put it this way. Every single thought we have, every single thought has an emotional component. And people think these thoughts are just coming and going, but they're not. If the emotional component of that thought is strong enough, it will be lodged in your subconscious mind. Now, this subconscious mind is, people know it as some nebulous thing that, what's your subconscious mind? It's traces in the brain and all that. No, it's not. Your subconscious mind, or your mind, is contained in your whole body and the aura that surrounds it. And if the way it was put in the Vipassana meditation course by the teacher, he said that some thoughts are like writing on water. For example, somebody gives you a telephone number. What's that number, Jack? You give them the telephone number. You phone it. You've forgotten it, and it's like. And then he said that another thing is like being written in wet sand before an incoming tide. For example, you have an argument with someone, and they come up later that you apologize and you make up. That's like water being washed away by the tide. Doesn't leave any deposits, right? But if someone does something really bad to you, like your girlfriend jilts you, or the husband walks out on the wife, leaving the kids, or the business goes bankrupt and you can't cope, that goes down as a deposit like it was chiseled into stone, and it stays with you. Now, in the Buddhist term, that's called a sankhara, and it's held within the mind body of the person. And it stays there. But worse than that, it continues to grow below the surface. Now, let me give you an example. Imagine a soldier goes off to war. He's a young boy. He goes off, he does his training, and then he's told to go out on patrol, and he does something dreadful, like creeps up on someone and cuts their throat, for example. And then that stays with him. He comes home and everybody says, oh, he's all right, he's okay. just seems to be coping all right, drinks a bit, but then gradually gets worse and worse. What's happening is the condition of the Sankara is continuing to grow below his subconscious level. And it can grow to the point where it can precipitate downwards in frequency and come out as a physical illness, and does often. So an illness starts at a higher plane. For example, a mental illness can start at a higher plane and then work down and get worse and worse and worse over time. And people say, oh, gee, I wonder where that came from. Is this making sense to you?
Mm. There's almost the language, I suppose the language that when I convert that is an act that someone does that doesn't resonate with their values. There's an insult, and maybe it's even a personal kind of moral insult. There's an incongruency with what they would like to have done in life, but the conditions where they did those in life, whether it was through their own will or they felt they were forced to do so. And then there is a cognitive fusion that occurs with there's a wrestling, grappling, whether it's guilt. Well, I'm not sure what the language is, but it doesn't fit right. The person can't allow that to have occurred or make room for that act, and over time, as that gets more and more entangled and meshed, it causes more and more angst, more and more grief, more and more discomfort, and that's a kind of building notion. Sounds like the mechanisms are all, I suppose, that does kind of seem like the narrative fits. What the language is always a bit different, but the language is so important as well in terms of it does describe what the narrative is. At the same time, it's hard to know whether this is a story that I'm telling myself using fancy words or, psychologically driven principles, ideas. It would really need to come from the person themselves to explain what's occurred for them and to try and unpack it. But it is nice to have a framework like the one that you're talking about, because it tries to say, try and act in a purposeful, deliberate way that does not go out and obviously put yourself in incongruence with your drive, with your value set, with your purpose.
Yeah, it's like a conflict really between your ego mind, or maybe even your rational mind, and your heart. They're not in alignment, and the heart's the ruler really. If you go against the heart, you suffer. If you go with the heart, or the intuition as I call it, you're fine. This is your guidance. This is your guiding light internally.
And I assume, even though the topic that we've started on is trying to find, fostering happiness and purposeful years in retirement, this applies throughout life, right?
Oh yes, of course.
Yeah, this is not when you turn age 65 or whatever the number is that the government says these days. This is a way of trying to live a rich, vibrant, and meaningful life. And you initially tried to do that through work, for example, trying to be connected with something that is also connected to your heart. And when you lost that for a period of time, those 17 years in the ATO, difficult years in terms of there was incongruence with what you wanted to be spending that time in, and trying to find something that you love. And then post employment, years of paid employment, you had the opportunity to say, I'm going to tap into some of my playful, joyful, speaking and the like, but there's a spiritual side that's much deeper that I want to, engage in and understand and learn a whole lot more. And that's also a connectedness to your heart or your values, that congruence between the head and the heart.
Yeah, I can remember I joined the Navy when I was 18, and I loved the Navy. I got out when I was 24. And then I joined civil aviation for a while, 11 years. But when I got out of the civil aviation, before I went to live in New Zealand, the RAAF were advertising for air traffic controllers. And I thought, I'm going to apply. And then I thought, no. Somewhere between 24 and 35, I had changed, and I realized, I said, I don't want to join the military. The military are geared up for killing other people. That's the basics. That's the basic of the military. They call it defense. Now they call it the Department of War in America. It's more close to it. I just could not bring myself to. I knew I would love the work, but my heart wouldn't let me do it. And so somewhere around about my early 30s, there was a shift in me, and probably I grew up. There's a certain age you think you're grown up at 18 and 19. You're not. You're still a kid adventuring, all adventure. And then suddenly at a certain age, I thought, well, what's life all about? What's it all about, Alfie?
When did you have children?
We had 3 kids. I'm a great grandparent now.
Congratulations.
And first child was born in 1960. The next one in 63, and the next one in 67. They're all grown up and got kids of their own now, and so forth. But then, so these years when I was in the Department of Civil Aviation were the young years where my wife and family travelled. I worked at Sydney Airport. Then I moved up to Dubbo Airport for a year. Came back to Sydney. Worked in Sydney for a little while, and then went up to Madang in New Guinea. We worked a year in Madang, and then another year in Port Moresby, and then back to Sydney again, where I stayed. I did a course in Melbourne and so forth. But yeah, so we did a lot of travelling when the kids were young. And then in 1971, 71, I went through this trauma. How could I put it? I told you about the business of the epiphany, standing in front of the mirror.
Yes.
But I still couldn't bring myself to leave the job because it was too good. I had excellent pay coming in, it was secure and all that. But I kept getting this pushing inside me. You've got to leave, you've got to leave. And I wouldn't. After about 2 years, I wrote out my resignation. And I knew I'd made enemies, so once they got this, I was not going to be able to change my mind. I drove to work and I pulled up at a letterbox and I put the resignation in the letterbox. My hand was trembling as I did it, and I dropped it in there. I turned away and it felt as though 100 weight had lifted off my shoulders. Honestly, I thought, it's gone. That part of my life's gone. But then I was out of work. And I applied to get jobs in Australia. Couldn't do any good. And my wife came up to me one day and I was sitting very despondent. She said, Tom, you've always wanted to go to New Zealand. Why don't you go over there, get a job, get a house and send for us? And I thought, oh. So on the strength of that, all these serendipitous events happened. First of all, I decided to go to New Zealand, and I got on this taxi to take me to the airport, and there was a bridge out somewhere and there was a terrific traffic jam. So when I got to the airport, I saw my flight leaving, and I thought, hello, to Auckland. Next flight, 3 hours late. I was meant to get the late flight because when I got on the plane, I sat next to this young lady. I said, oh, I'm migrating to New Zealand. Oh, are you? Blah, blah, blah. We got chatting. She said, well, here's what you do, Tom. She said, when you get to we get to the end, stay on the bus to the very end, go to the terminal and ask for John, for example. John's a friend of mine, and he'll take you to a boarding house where you can get cheap accommodation. So all of this happened because I spoke to that young lady. I got onto this board, went to this boarding house, and in those days, the way to find out about a city was to look at the telephone directory. I opened the telephone directory to the white pages, and I thought, do I know anyone in New Zealand? One name popped up, a very unusual name, a fellow called Ron Pedruco, Spanish sort of name. I looked him up. Would you believe it? He lived in Auckland, where I was. I phoned him up. He said, stay there, Tom, I'll be around. He picked me up and took me to his house where I stayed. He introduced me where I got a job. He told me I can get accommodation, and within a week, my wife and kids had joined me. Now, tell me that's not serendipity. It wasn't meant to happen. It happened. You know what I mean? That's life. If you go with the flow and don't fight it.
Mm. It's incredible. It's almost that whole concept of saying yes, you know, that we do not know what tomorrow brings, but if we overthink it, we will most certainly have all the reasons why not to go. But there's an adventurous spirit that I see in you, and a willingness, and clearly, you know, wonderful support from your partner as well, of saying, why don't you do it, Tom? You know, here you are talking about it, go for it. You know, that's incredible, incredible strength and support to you know, allow you to do that, and in actual fact encourage, you know. And so on that, still, I imagine incredible amounts of angst and anxiety, and you know,
there was.
how it's going to all play out. But it unfolded. It had to unfold with something.
Yeah.
There was always going to be an interesting story, no matter what.
Yeah, there was when I got the job over there, because jobs were very hard to get in New Zealand, even in my special field. There was only the national airline, the international airline, and of all things, the international post office, international telegraph office. I tried to get a job with the national airlines, no good. Couldn't get in with Air New Zealand either. Ended up with the what they call the New Zealand Overseas Telegraph Office. And when I got the job, the bloke looked at me and he said, I'll give you this job, Tom, providing you give me your word that you won't leave for 12 months. And I did. And I hated doing that, because within the first few days of the job, I hated it. Because not hated the job, but the hours of work. It was shift work, 24 hours, 7 days a week, long hours, learning a new job, and treated very badly. I was the junior fellow sort of thing. But after a while, after about 3 or 4 months, I became very good at it, and I liked it. And I ended up, 15 months had gone by, and I worked with a fellow came up over from Australia who I knew. We went out to dinner, and he got a job working for the Auckland Electric Company. Auckland. So he knew I wanted to get at a job. So suddenly I got this telephone call out of the blue. This is the HR man, they used to call them personnel in those days, ringing me. He said, "This Tom Ware?" "Yeah." He said, "I understand you'd like a job with us." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You can come across, work in our radio room." So I then went from all of these years specialising in communication to what they call an underground, working in an office of underground engineers doing their paperwork. And what an eye-opener that was. I used to go out on the road with them wearing a little white hat and a dust coat and going into all that, livening up new buildings and all that. So this was a real good job for me. And the pay was only a little bit less than the other because the tax was so high in the other job. And I found that I could do the work, the whole day's work. I'd be finished by 10:30, and I had all this spare time. That's when I joined Toastmasters. I used to do all this Toastmaster work in their time, the business time, you know, working out my speeches and so forth. But then suddenly, well, not suddenly, after a period of time, I thought, I'm too young to be retired. This job's like being retired. I want to go home to Australia. So we came back home after 2.5 years. We came back to Australia, and we were meant to, because I planned to go to live in Queensland, and even booked everything to go to Queensland. And then the people who were renting my home wouldn't get out, and I had to come back. And it was destined that I live in Sydney. So I lived in Sydney, where I've been ever since, except for a trip down to Antarctic, a year down there.
Wow, wow. No, I've never been there, but it sounds like there is an attitude of being open-minded, taking a risk, create a memory, or a story, be engaged, always be doing something. And you do have a lot of optimism in the way that you look at things, saying, it was meant to be, it was my destiny, rather than seeing, a pessimistic side. There's an optimism that you bring to the perspective of each of these stories.
Yeah, I think the optimism comes about by a belief that we're immortal souls. We're here to experience. If you believe, if you were an atheist and you think that you come out of nothing and you go nowhere, I imagine you'd be getting a bit panicky as you get towards the last years, because you'd be disillusioned. But if you have probably a lot of people are agnostics. They'll have a bet each way. Maybe there's something, maybe there's not. If I die, it's going to be black and there's going to be nothing anyway, so why worry about it? And if there's not, well, I've been a good fella, I'm going to go to somewhere good. But if you've been a naughty boy and you know it, you're getting close to the end of your time. I mean, you can imagine some of these political leaders at the moment who are real warmongers and they're getting close to their time. They must be thinking, well, if there's something there, I'm going to be down shoveling coal for a long while.
I wonder what's your philosophy and thought around that, in terms of someone who we might perceive is, doing the quote unquote wrong thing, harming others, but genuinely in their mind and in their heart, they're doing the right thing, and there are sometimes those scenarios where someone believes that their mission, that the mission that they have in mind, that potentially will help humanity, requires some casualties. So for there to be peace, you've got to go out and have some casualties. What are your thoughts about that? How do you reconcile that, where they believe they're potentially working in line with their values? Do they have a peace of mind in that, or are they grappling also with this, discomfort that you and I might feel, because it would be incongruent for us, but it seems like it might be congruent for them. I can't speak for them, but I'm just trying to kind of put a scenario together.
Yeah, I think that'd be right. I mean, you get these people who are very religious, whether it be a Christian religion or some other religion, to this point of being dangerous. We are right and you're wrong. But what is it really is? It's an idea in their mind. It's not necessarily coming from their real self. It's an agitated mind that if the world comes around to my way of thinking, everything will be all right. And we still have that to a large degree. I mean, look at the Middle East. Two different ideologies, the Christians and the Muslims, because of different beliefs, they've been having this war, which has been going on since about 1948 and still going on. And it's just ideas in their mind, we're right and you're wrong. You can understand both sides of the argument. Both feel really bad, feel they're in the right. But the trouble is, it's handed down by the conversations in homes. mum and dad are saying, "Oh, those people, oh, they're terrible. You know, they'll kill you if they get a chance." How's that kid going to grow up? And that's the way it is. It's just handed down. We know, for example, in with the Jewish religion, the Romans actually brought or have they had a big battle, I think, around about 50 AD or something like that, where the Romans virtually dispersed the Jews, and they fled all over the world, as you know. So for the next 2,000 years, you've got the Arabs running Israel and all that area, right? And then all of a sudden, after World War II, Britain, well, we're going to do the right thing. We're going to let these people go back to where they really come from, which is what they do. How do you think the people who were there the last 2,000 years felt that when these other people were coming back? So this is it. Because they're different religions. If they were the same religion, they'd have been welcome. They'd have been like migrants coming in.
It seems that when we think about an ideal or a belief, if you will, that's a thought that is held really tightly. So it becomes a rigid concept, a rigid idea, and it might be that within the rigidity is where the problem lies in terms of there's a lot of people in today's age that really rigidly hold the concept of fairness. They believe that life should be fair, when in actual fact, that's an ideal. And if they hold that really tightly, they're going to be in a lot of distress probably for their entire life, because how they measure fairness, probably has lots of problems attached to it. But life isn't fair. Two people can have the exact same experience walking down the street, and one person, is struck by a branch that falls off a tree. It's not fair that one person's hit and the other one's not. It's probably not even fair that someone's hit. It depends what the word fairness means, but sometimes we grab concepts, whether it's a religious concept or a faith, or it could be even just the concept of life should be fair. Birth isn't fair. There's lots of women around the world that have historically passed, and many to come, sadly as well, within just childbirth. There's all sorts of quote unquote unfairness, and I don't know what fairness and unfairness are, but when they're rigidly held, it seems like this is where conflicts can arise, whether it's a war or I don't know, two neighbors arguing about if they should have the same mulch so it matches up or not, or something. We can come up with all sorts of items to fight about.
Yeah, that's right.
And maybe part of trying to be happy and fostering joy and satisfaction, there's a flexibility model in here in trying to be open-minded, not grabbing an ideal really tightly, still having some guides. Like, for example, I think most people would agree with not harming, let's do the gross exaggeration of, don't kill others.
Yeah.
But we do have law enforcement that, under certain conditions we might. Or there could be even a belief of, there are humane times where you might kill someone to take them out of their pain and suffering. And now we're in a very complicated and controversial conversation that, end of life care, becomes a challenging one as well, that when we hold that tightly.
That's true, and yet the answer is given there in Conversation with God, Book 1. They ask the question, any question. The answer is, what would love do now? What would love do now? And then you've got to feel in your own heart, what would love do now? And you won't go wrong. But if you rationalize and say, well, they've always done it this way, and the law says,
Sure.
Let
And
the poor bugger suffer. He's supposed to die naturally.
from that concept of what would love do now, do we look at it, each person gets to ask that question themselves rather than saying, I'm asking myself the question and I'm going to apply it to what others should therefore do? Or is it more of a personal,
It's a
I get
personal
kind
thing.
of, yeah.
Personal. I mean, you can't dictate whatever people are feeling and their
Mm.
decisions. But by enough people setting the example of what would love do now, the whole world changes.
Mm.
When you think of it, every thought and every organization really is based on either one or the other, love or fear. For example, Salvation Army was founded on love. The Chubb security company was founded on fear. Somebody's going to steal my stuff, so I better have a safe. Fair enough. I mean, you could divide every single thing into, is it coming from love or is it coming from fear initially, the initial idea. And you'll find that the majority of organizations in our civilization at the moment are based on some sort of fear, not the other way around.
And I suppose in some sense, maybe fear comes from love as well, in that trying to protect money for some people would be the love of creating stability for their family, for, let's say,
Absolutely right. Absolutely
healthcare or
right.
what.
Yeah.
And so they begin to protect stability, or they protect access to healthcare or access to education or whatever it might be. It's almost like one and the same thing. What we love, we tend to protect. Yeah. It's quite interesting. Quite interesting. What is next for you, Tom? Where do you see you've had many chapters, it sounds like. What's this chapter? What you're trying to write the narrative of your life, being very, very present. What do you make these, next
Few years.
20 years, 30
Well,
years?
I'm not going to live
Who
for 20
knows,
years
right?
because I'm turning 90 next year, so I'm not even making any 5-year plans. But the point is, I'll probably continue with what I'm doing. I like to give presentations and workshops on things. I call it creating your creativity, but there's going to be a lot of the sort of stuff we've been talking about here in that. It will evolve, and I hope to draw the people along. I want them to be searchers. I don't want them to just come along and learn one about public speaking or how to be better in business. I want them to open up their own understanding of themselves. That's my aim. I've got something on the wall here. Do you excuse my back a moment? I'll go and get it.
No,
Just on the wall
please,
behind me.
please, absolutely. I must say, I know you mentioned you're not making any plans beyond 5 years, but you are very, very vibrant.
No, it's too difficult to get it off. But it's my ideal self. What I did in 2012, at the age of 75, I think it was 75, I sat down and wrote my ideal self. Right. I amended it slightly in 2017 and again in 2019. But the beauty of an ideal is an ideal can never be reached.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not a goal. It's something you work towards. And my ideal was to be a spiritual teacher, if I might put it that way, continually involving myself and being able to help other people evolve. That's not the exact words. The exact words are written there.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's a guide, it's a value set of not only being a spiritual teacher, but you're also working on yourself. You're evolving that open-mindedness and helping others doing the same. There's still a very strong element of an act of service, supporting others in their journey too.
Yeah. There's a lot of people doing that, though. A lot of people. You'd
Yeah.
be surprised.
Tom, where can people find out more if they're listening to this and they want to continue that conversation of learning more about themselves, and whether that is, this topic of retirement, or it seems like it's much broader than that now. Where can people find out more?
Well, are you after um, an email address or something like that?
Well, in any books that you might say that could be a catalyst for exploring how to live, life well, or how people can maybe even connect with you, how they can go along to the presentations that you offer, yeah, any wisdom that you can offer.
Well, did I send you a list of the books I've written? Have you got?
No,
Have
but
you,
let's make sure we put them on our show notes as well. So if you send those across, maybe your YouTube channel as well, that
yeah,
might be a good place that we can put there, so that anyone that's interesting can go to neshnikolic.com and find all of the links there.
right. Well, I'm on my full name, as you know, Arthur Thomas Ware. I'm on YouTube. I'm also on what they call hub pages. Um, I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm on Facebook,
Hey,
and I'm also on a number of other organisations' Facebook sites and
it
so
won't be
forth.
hard to find you then.
Yeah,
Lovely.
not
Lovely.
hard to find me, no, no.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for taking the time, and also for the work that you do, and in sharing these concepts. I think they're done in such great spirit, and offers a real opportunity for all of us to contemplate, to think about our own lives and how we're living them. And it sounds like you have been searching for a long time, not just in retirement, but continue to do so. And there's something, I think, for us to all take away from this conversation. So, yeah, thank you for today.
Thank you, Nesh. A pleasure to talk with you.